My counselor kept dozing during our sessions. I made sure she stayed alert for the review board. Can you imagine pouring your heart out, the rawest grief you've ever felt, to a therapist you're paying hundreds for, only to realize she's fast asleep? But it gets worse. She weaponized my trauma, twisted my words, and made me question my own sanity. This isn't just about bad therapy. This is about fighting back when someone tries to bury you under your own pain. After my brother died in a horrific car accident, my world shattered. I was adrift, suffocating under a grief so heavy I could barely breathe. My doctor, seeing my desperation, recommended Dr. Hutchinson. The best trauma specialist in the city, he said. Her website promised 20 years of experience, cutting-edge techniques. She charged $300 a session and didn't take insurance, but I was so desperate, so broken, that the money didn't matter. I just needed someone, anyone, to help me navigate this crushing darkness. The first session seemed fine. She asked all the right questions, nodding intently, appearing truly engaged. I felt a tiny flicker of hope. But by the third session, as I choked out words about finding my brother's belongings, I noticed her eyes getting heavy. A little flicker of doubt ignited in me. By the fifth session, it was undeniable. She was definitely, unequivocally asleep. Her head would drop. She'd jerk awake, then try to play it off like she'd been deep in thought. I was pouring my entire soul out, recounting the agonizing day my brother died, and she was literally snoring softly. Can you even imagine? When I finally just stopped talking, she woke up, looked at me, and said, "We should explore how you feel about that." She had no idea what that was. She hadn't heard a single word. I tried to be gentle, to give her the benefit of the doubt. "Dr. Hutchinson," I asked, my voice barely a whisper, "are you okay? Do you need to reschedule?" Her reaction was immediate and shockingly defensive. She got offended. She told me she was using an advanced meditation technique to better absorb my words. She actually claimed her unconscious mind was processing my trauma while her body rested. She said it was an advanced therapeutic method I wouldn't understand. My stomach clenched. It was so obviously a lie, but in my vulnerable state, a tiny part of me thought, asterisk maybe? Could this be real? Asterisk the next session. She was out cold within 10 minutes. I decided to test her. I fabricated a wild story, saying my brother had come back as a ghost and was standing right behind her. 5 minutes later, she woke up, completely oblivious. "How's your week been?" she asked, as if nothing had happened. When I told her what I'd said, she just lied. Again, she claimed she'd heard everything and was processing it internally. Then she turned it on me. She said my hostility toward her methods was a projection of my anger about my brother's death. She told me I needed to trust the process, to stop trying to control therapy. It was pure gaslighting. I kept going back, though. Why? Because I'd paid for a package of 12 sessions up front, a huge chunk of money. Each time, she slept longer. Once, she was out for 40 minutes of our 50-minute session. When she finally woke up, she declared we'd had a breakthrough and scheduled me for twice a week. She actually said my energy was so heavy it was affecting her ability to stay conscious, and that meant we were doing deep work. She even had the audacity to charge me extra for these intensive energy sessions. In the waiting room, other patients would rave about how lucky I was to see her, mentioning her 6-month waiting list. I just sat there, wondering how many of them were paying to watch her nap, too. One day, I brought coffee for both of us, hoping caffeine might help. She refused, saying it interfered with her therapeutic presence. Then, she fell asleep holding her notebook, and it clattered to the floor, spilling open. My blood ran cold. There, clear as day, were grocery lists. Not deep insights, not therapeutic notes. Grocery lists. When I pointed this out, she called me paranoid. She said those were metaphorical groceries related to my psychological needs. Milk represented nurturing. Bread was foundational support. Eggs, she explained with a perfectly straight face, symbolized new beginnings. I'd had enough. I demanded a refund for my remaining sessions. She refused, citing the no refund contract I'd signed. She told me if I left, I'd be abandoning my healing journey. Then the threat. She'd tell other therapists I was a difficult patient who couldn't commit to treatment. That was the last straw. That's when I knew I couldn't just walk away. This woman was predatory. I got creative. I did some digging and found out Dr. Hutchinson was up for a prestigious position on the state therapy board. Her interview was in 3 weeks, and it included a live demonstration session with a volunteer patient. I knew what I had to do. Through my cousin, who worked at the board office, I volunteered, using a fake name and a completely fabricated issue. The day of the interview, my hands were shaking so hard against the steering wheel I had to grip it tighter, just to keep them steady. I watched Dr. Hutchinson walk into the building, looking confident, professional, completely unaware of the storm I was about to unleash. She couldn't keep hurting people. 6 other patients had already complained, and she'd twisted their words, made them doubt themselves. Today that ended. I checked the clock, counting down the minutes. 15 minutes after she went in, I grabbed my purse and walked towards the entrance. The receptionist smiled, and I gave her the fake name, Sarah Mitchell. She printed a badge, directed me down the hall. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. I saw 2 other volunteers in the waiting room, a man, a young woman. They looked nervous. I kept my true motivation buried deep, my face neutral. Every time someone walked past, I tensed, terrified Dr. Hutchinson might recognize me. But she'd been asleep for most of our actual sessions. I doubted she remembered my face at all. A board assistant called Sarah Mitchell, and I stood up, following her to the demonstration room. Through a 2-way mirror, I could see 5 board members, including the chairman, Stanley, silver-haired and serious. The assistant showed me in, told me Dr. Hutchinson would be with me shortly. I sat down, my reflection staring back at me from the mirror. Dr. Hutchinson entered, extended her hand. I shook it. No recognition in her eyes, not a flicker. She introduced herself, professional, warm, engaged, a side of her I'd never seen. "What brings you to therapy today?" she asked, her tone genuinely interested. It was infuriating. I began describing fictional workplace stress, using the exact same monotonous voice I'd used when I was talking about my brother's death, about my soul-crushing grief. I talked about a demanding boss, undermining coworkers, feeling undervalued despite long hours. I kept my delivery deliberately flat, boring, just like I had when she'd slept through my pain. For the first 10 minutes, she was attentive, nodding, asking appropriate follow-up questions. The board members behind the mirror were writing furiously, seemingly impressed. I kept going, describing a boss who criticized me in front of the team, a coworker who stole my research, endless, unappreciated overtime. Around the 12-minute mark, I saw it. Her blink slowed, her head tilted. She caught herself, straightened, nodded, pretending to be absorbing my words. By 15 minutes, her questions were generic, repetitive. "How did that make you feel?" She'd ask about one situation, then 30 seconds later, the exact same question about a different one. She was struggling. Her eyes had that heavy, familiar look. At 18 minutes, her eyes fully closed for several seconds. Her chin dipped, she jerked awake, blinked hard, and told me to continue exploring those feelings. I'd been silent for 30 seconds, testing her. She hadn't even noticed. Behind the mirror, a board member leaned forward, scribbling. Another glanced at Stanley with raised eyebrows. I resumed my monotone drone, describing an imaginary boss obsessed with quarterly budget projections, scrutinizing printer paper costs. Dr. Hutchinson's head dropped noticeably, chin almost touching her chest before she snapped upright. Through the mirror, I saw a board member's pen hover, watching her fight it. I continued, explaining my fictional boss wanted weekly status updates, monthly performance reviews. Dr. Hutchinson's eyes closed, and stayed closed, her head tilted to the left, her breathing deepening. 20 minutes into the session, she was fully asleep, in front of 5 board members. I could hear that soft snoring, the sound that had haunted my actual therapy sessions, made me question my own sanity. The gentle wheeze on each exhale I'd secretly recorded on my phone. Too scared to ever play it for anyone because I thought I was the problem, just like she said. I kept talking about spreadsheets and email chains, about endless meetings to plan other meetings. She slept through every word, her notebook precarious, her hands folded. The surreal vindication of it almost made me smile, but I kept my face neutral, my voice flat. 3 board members were writing furiously now, glancing at each other, genuine concern etched on their faces. Diane, a board member I'd researched, looked shocked, mouthing something to Stanley. Another shook his head, underlining something 3 times in his notes. I continued for a full 10 minutes, while she slept. I paused occasionally, seeing if she'd stir. She didn't, completely unconscious. Then, a paper slid off her lap, landing softly on the floor. She still didn't wake. Finally, Stanley stood up, walked to the door, and knocked firmly, 3 times, loud enough to make the room vibrate. Dr. Hutchinson jerked awake, violently, her whole body spasming. Her notebook flew, papers scattering across the floor. She blinked rapidly, looking around, confused, flushed, her hair disheveled. Stanley entered, his expression neutral, professional. "Is everything all right, Dr. Hutchinson?" he asked, polite but firm. She immediately launched into her usual excuse. The deep meditation, processing my energy, absorbing my words on an unconscious level. She claimed her therapeutic consciousness was fully present. Stanley nodded slowly, then asked her to summarize what I'd shared. She spouted vague therapeutic nonsense, workplace boundaries, self-advocacy, but not a single specific detail, because she'd been unconscious for the last 15 minutes. Diane walked in then, her notepad clutched. She asked Dr. Hutchinson to repeat the specific situation I'd described about my boss. Dr. Hutchinson fumbled, gathering papers to buy time, then offered more generic platitudes about difficult authority figures and power dynamics. Nothing concrete. Diane wrote something, exchanged a long, knowing look with Stanley. I watched Dr. Hutchinson realize she was caught, her face flushing a deeper red. Her usual manipulation tactics weren't going to work here. She tried to blame me. She told the board members I was intentionally boring, monotonous, sabotaging her. She claimed my energy was deliberately draining, that I was projecting hostility. She said I was one of those difficult patients who couldn't commit to healing. Stanley's face hardened. "Dr. Hutchinson," he said, his voice flat, professional, "staying awake during patient sessions is the absolute minimum requirement for a therapist. The bare minimum." He asked if she had any health problems preventing her from staying conscious. Her face went from red to purple. She started talking frantically, insisting this had never happened before. She blamed my specific energy for some weird reaction. The same exact language she used on me. "Certain patients emit frequencies," she said, "that affect my consciousness." The board member stared, clearly not buying it. Diane underlined something twice. Stanley thanked her for her time, saying they needed to speak with me privately. He asked her to wait in the hall. She wanted to argue, but another board member opened the door for her. She walked out, shoulders tight, face still that angry purple. The door closed, and I could finally breathe. Stanley asked me to wait in the waiting room while they consulted. My legs felt shaky, but stronger now. The other volunteers were gone. I sat there, shaking from a mix of relief and adrenaline. They saw it. They saw everything. They watched her fall asleep. They heard her try to gaslight her way out of it. They witnessed exactly what she had done to me for 3 months. I pulled out my phone, almost texted Maddie, but decided to wait. 40 minutes later, the assistant called me back. My heart pounded, but in a good way, like something important was about to happen. Dr. Hutchinson wasn't in the room. All 5 board members sat there, serious. Stanley gestured to the chair. "We have some questions about your experience," he said. "Are you willing to answer them honestly?" "Yes," I said, my voice surprising me with its calm. I began explaining how Dr. Hutchinson seemed engaged at first. Then her eyes got heavy, her responses generic. By 20 minutes, she was struggling. Her head dropped, her breathing changed. I told them I kept talking to see what would happen, and she fell completely asleep for over 10 minutes. When Stanley knocked, she couldn't recall anything specific. I kept my tone neutral, factual. Then Diane leaned forward. "Have you ever been in therapy before, or was this your first experience?" The question hung in the air. This was it, the moment I had to choose. Keep up the lie or tell the truth. I looked at their faces, concerned, professional. I decided honesty was my only path forward. I wasn't being completely truthful about who I am, I admitted. I was actually Dr. Hutchinson's patient for 3 months under my real name. The room went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. One board member stopped writing, just stared. Before they could interrupt, I kept talking. I explained how she fell asleep during most of our sessions, how she'd drop off while I talked about my brother's death, then wake up and claim it was an advanced meditation technique. I told them about the grocery lists, about her refusal to refund my prepaid sessions, about her threats to tell other therapists I was difficult if I left. Stanley's jaw tightened. "Why didn't you report this through the proper channels?" he asked. I told him I tried to address it directly, but she manipulated me into doubting myself. She made me feel like I was the problem, that my grief was so heavy it made her need rest, that I was hostile for questioning her. I felt completely powerless, I confessed, my voice cracking a little. Going up against someone with 20 years of experience and a 6-month waiting list. I didn't think anyone would believe me over her professional reputation. It hurt to say because it was so true. The board members exchanged significant glances. Stanley wrote something, then looked back at me. "You're not the first person to report this kind of behavior from Dr. Hutchinson," he said gravely. "We've received 6 other complaints over the past 2 years, almost identical experiences." Diane picked up. Dr. Hutchinson had successfully dismissed every single one. She'd claimed those patients had dissociative episodes, memory problems related to their mental health. She'd twisted their words, made their complaints sound like symptoms of their illness, not accurate observations of her behavior. "Without objective proof," Diane explained, her voice heavy with regret. "Like what we just witnessed today, there was no way to verify the complaints or take action." Stanley added, "Your actions today, while unconventional, have provided the direct evidence needed to validate what 6 other people tried to report. What you did will likely result in a formal investigation that should have happened 2 years ago." Everything hit me at once. 6 other people. She'd twisted their words, made them sound crazy. And she almost did the same to me. My throat was tight. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice shaky. Stanley leaned back. They were suspending her application for the board position immediately. Her case was going to the medical licensing board for a full investigation. He thanked me for my bravery, apologized that the previous complaints hadn't been taken seriously enough. I just nodded, unable to speak. Diane touched my shoulder gently. "Take your time before driving home," she said. I left the building on legs that felt disconnected, sat in my car in the parking garage for 20 minutes and just cried. It was this weird mix of relief and lingering anger, making my whole body shake. I finally texted Maddie. It worked. They saw everything. She can't say I was imagining things anymore. My phone rang instantly. Maddie was cheering so loud I had to hold it away from my ear. She said she was proud of me, that I'd turned something that made me feel powerless into actual action. She said I'd made sure Dr. Hutchinson would face real consequences. I started crying again, but this time it felt lighter. Maddie came over that evening with wine and Thai food. We sat on my couch, and I told her every detail. "How do you feel now that it's done?" she asked. I felt lighter, yes, but also a little empty. This didn't fix my original problem. I still needed real therapy for my brother's death. Exposing Dr. Hutchinson was crucial, but it didn't bring back the 3 months I'd wasted with her when I desperately needed help. Maddie, ever practical, reminded me that finding a good therapist now would be easier because I'd learned to trust my own judgment when something felt wrong. 2 days later, an unfamiliar number called. It was Dominic Weeks, an attorney specializing in therapist malpractice. Stanley from the therapy board had given him my contact info. He asked if I'd be interested in discussing a malpractice claim for the money I lost and the harm Dr. Hutchinson caused. I agreed to meet him. His office was downtown, dark wood, diplomas everywhere. Dominic, maybe 50, with kind eyes, made me feel less nervous. He reviewed my documentation, prepaid contracts, my notes about her sleeping, her refusal to refund, her threats. "You have a strong case," he said, "for both breach of contract and professional negligence." He worked on contingency. He only got paid if we won. He believed we could recover my fees plus additional damages. He thought her insurance company would settle once they saw the evidence. I agreed. Signing those papers, putting legal action into motion, felt like reclaiming power in a situation where I'd felt utterly helpless. 3 weeks after the board demonstration, a letter arrived from the state medical licensing board. They wanted a formal statement about my experiences with Dr. Hutchinson. I printed it, staring at the blank screen on my laptop. Where to start? I decided on chronology. I started with the first session, where her eyes got heavy, detailing what I was talking about, how long she slept, her excuse. Then the second time, the third, every single incident, the advanced meditation technique, the ghost test, the 40-minute nap followed by a breakthrough, the coffee incident, the grocery lists. By Saturday evening, I had 12 single-space pages. Then I added a section on the financial aspects, prepaid package, extra charges for intensive energy sessions, the no refund contract. Her threats, her claim that leaving meant abandoning my healing journey. Sunday morning, I tackled the gaslighting, how she twisted my concerns, called my hostility a projection, blamed my heavy energy. By Sunday afternoon, I was emotionally drained, but I had 18 pages covering everything. Reading it all compiled made me realize just how bad it had truly been. Each individual incident alone I'd rationalized, but together it was a clear, horrifying pattern of negligence and manipulation. I emailed it to Maddie, asking for help organizing it. She came, over with her laptop and a binder, reading through my entire statement, shaking her head, muttering angry noises. "The licensing board needs to see this exactly as you wrote it," she said. "The emotional honesty is powerful." But she suggested adding section headers, a timeline chart. We spent 3 hours reformatting. Maddie created a table. Date, duration of sleep, my topic, her response. A financial summary. Gaslighting examples categorized, deflection, blame-shifting, professional intimidation. Her husband, Ruben, who worked in medical licensing, reviewed it. He sat at my kitchen table for 30 minutes, making notes. "This is exactly the kind of detailed account they need," he told me. "Most complaints are too vague. Your documentation, the contract, itemized charges, the written no-refund policy, it proves financial exploitation." He suggested section on the impact on my mental health, how her negligence delayed my grief processing, added secondary trauma. I wrote 2 more pages, about still needing therapy for my brother's death, about the 3 months I wasted, about how her gaslighting made me doubt my own perceptions when I was most vulnerable. By the time Maddie and Ruben left, my statement was 23 pages, clear, organized, devastating. I submitted it online Tuesday morning. 6 days later, an investigator called. She thanked me for the detailed statement. said most complaints didn't have this level of documentation. My account, she said, matched the other complaints almost exactly, right down to the meditation technique excuse and the metaphorical grocery list explanation. Your documentation of dates and specific incidents, she told me, helps establish a clear pattern that corroborates what other patients reported. They were building a case showing repeated negligence across multiple patients. She asked if I'd testify at a formal hearing. Yes, I said immediately. I want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. After hanging up, I felt this strange mix of validation and anger. Validation because an official investigator had confirmed I wasn't crazy. Anger because if they'd taken those previous 6 complaints seriously, I never would have become her patient in the first place. For weeks after the board demonstration, I was grocery shopping when my phone rang. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me. A woman's voice. State Medical Licensing Board. An update on your complaint against Dr. Hutchinson. My heart raced. I abandoned my cart, walked outside to hear better. Based on the board demonstration, she explained, the previous complaints and the new detailed statements, including yours, they've decided to temporarily suspend Dr. Hutchinson's therapy license, pending completion of their investigation. She was prohibited from seeing any patients. Effective immediately. They'd already notified her. I thanked her, hung up, standing in the grocery store parking lot, trying to process. Dr. Hutchinson couldn't hurt anyone else. She couldn't gaslight vulnerable patients, charge them for naps, threaten them, or manipulate them. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, crying from relief, from a fierce satisfaction that felt almost uncomfortable in its intensity. 3 days later, Dominic called. Her malpractice insurance company wanted to talk settlement. They wanted to avoid trial, where her negligence would become public record beyond just the licensing board. Dominic explained this was a common tactic when they knew they'd lose. He asked if I wanted to hear their offer. I did. He called back Friday. They were offering to refund all my session fees, $3,600, plus an additional $5,000 for damages related to delayed grief processing and emotional harm. $8,600 total. It seemed like a lot of money, but also not enough. Not enough for 3 months of my life when I desperately needed real help. Not enough for the gaslighting that made me doubt my sanity. Not enough for the threats and manipulation. I called Maddie. Did accepting this feel like letting Dr. Hutchinson off too easy? Maddie reminded me the licensing board investigation was separate. The settlement was about my financial losses, my personal compensation. The board was handling accountability. You can accept the settlement, she said, and still feel good about exposing her publicly. One doesn't cancel out the other. She also pointed out that I could use the money for actual therapy. Dr. Hutchinson would, essentially, be funding my healing. That shifted everything. I wasn't taking money to stay quiet. I was taking money she owed me, plus compensation for making everything worse. I called Dominic on Monday. I'll accept, I told him, but I have one condition. Dr. Hutchinson has to provide written acknowledgement that she fell asleep during my sessions and that her behavior was professionally inappropriate. I didn't want just money. I wanted her to admit in writing what she did. Dominic said he'd negotiate it. 2 days later, he called back, sounding pleased. They accepted. Dr. Hutchinson would provide a written statement. They wanted to close this case quickly. 8 weeks after the board demonstration, a FedEx envelope arrived. Inside, a check for $8,600 and a 1-page letter on Dr. Hutchinson's professional letterhead. I sat on my couch, reading it 3 times. It was brief, clearly drafted by her lawyer, but it said what I needed. She acknowledged falling asleep. She admitted it violated professional standards and was inappropriate. She stated her treatment of me failed to meet acceptable therapeutic practices. Reading those words, with her signature, gave me a profound sense of closure I hadn't known I needed. For months, She'd gaslit me, made me doubt myself. Now I had written proof. I wasn't crazy. She fell asleep. It was wrong. I filed the letter next to my documentation, deposited the check, and scheduled an appointment with a new therapist, Dr. Megan Foster. That same week, a Facebook message popped up from someone named Leah Espinoza. She was one of Dr. Hutchinson's patients who'd filed a complaint 2 years ago. The licensing investigator had contacted her because my complaint and the board demonstration had given them enough evidence to reopen all the previous cases. Leah said she wanted to thank me for finally getting people to take this seriously. She'd filed her complaint after Dr. Hutchinson slept through 6 consecutive sessions, but the board had dismissed it, claiming Leah had dissociative episodes. She'd stopped pursuing it, felt alone, doubted herself. Now, she wrote, the investigator had told her my detailed documentation and public demonstration proved Dr. Hutchinson had a pattern of negligence. Knowing other people experience the same thing, Leah wrote, helps me trust my own memories again. I messaged her back immediately, suggesting coffee. 2 days later, Leah and I met. We hugged awkwardly, like strangers who'd been through a war together. We made small talk. Then she took a deep breath and started telling me about her sessions. The pattern was exactly the same. First few sessions fine, then the sleeping, then the gaslighting about meditation techniques, the heavy energy excuse. She paid up front. Dr. Hutchinson threatened her too. The board dismissed her complaint because Dr. Hutchinson claimed Leah had dissociative episodes. Leah had felt completely alone, doubted her own memories. Hearing her story made me furious all over again. Dr. Hutchinson used the same manipulation tactics on multiple people, exploiting their vulnerability. Leah thanked me 3 times for finally getting people to take this seriously. I told her she was brave for filing that first complaint, even when no one listened. We shared details for 2 hours, finding dozens of similarities. Before we left, Leah mentioned something interesting. 2 other former patients had also reached out to the licensing board, renewed complaints after hearing about the investigation. Women who'd given up years ago. Now they had hope. What started as my personal fight against someone who hurt me was becoming something bigger. A collective accountability process for multiple victims who had been dismissed and silenced. I drove home, a mix of validation and sadness. Validation, because I was right to expose her publicly. If I'd just filed a normal complaint, like Leah, it probably would have been dismissed. But sadness, because so many people suffered for so long. 3 months after the board demonstration, the medical licensing board scheduled a formal hearing on Dr. Hutchinson's license. Dominic called with the date. I didn't have to testify, but I wanted to be there. The hearing room was small, fluorescent lit. Dr. Hutchinson sat at a table with her attorney, looking older, tired. When she saw me in the gallery, her face hardened. For 4 hours, the board reviewed testimony from 8 former patients. Some submitted statements. 3 testified in person. Each story, fine at first, then sleeping, then gaslighting, then threats. One woman described Dr. Hutchinson sleeping through 45 minutes while she talked about childhood sexual abuse. An expert witness testified, maintaining consciousness is the absolute baseline for a therapist. Falling asleep is gross negligence, patient abandonment. Dr. Hutchinson's attorney argued she had a sleep disorder, recently diagnosed and was now treating it. He claimed she didn't know during the period in question that it wasn't intentional, but a board member pointed out multiple patients confronted her. She denied it, called it meditation, accused them of misperception. How did she explain that? Dr. Hutchinson stammered, flustered, claiming she was defensive because she felt attacked. The damage was done. After a 2-hour lunch break, the board reconvened. The chairman read their decision. They revoked Dr. Hutchinson's license permanently, effective immediately. The decision cited a pattern of negligence, patient harm, manipulation of vulnerable individuals, failure to meet minimum professional standards. She could apply for reinstatement after 5 years, but only with successful treatment of her sleep disorder and ethics training. I felt this complicated rush of emotions. Satisfaction because justice was served. She couldn't hurt more people, but also sadness. It didn't erase the 3 months I wasted. The 3 months I desperately needed real help processing my brother's death. That time was lost. No decision could give back. Outside, I saw Leia waiting. She'd driven 3 hours. We hugged, properly this time. When I told her about the permanent revocation, she started crying. Not sad tears, but relief. That evening, Maddie took me to my favorite Italian restaurant. She toasted to holding people accountable. We talked about how, yes, Dr. Hutchinson delayed my healing, but my response showed incredible strength. I protected countless future patients. I turned a powerless situation into something meaningful. Part of me was still angry. The system should have caught her years ago. Leia and those other patients shouldn't have been dismissed. Maddie agreed the system failed, but sometimes, she said, it takes one person refusing to accept that failure to force real change. The board was implementing new protocols now, requiring more thorough follow-up, considering direct observation. It was something. Over the next few weeks, I used part of the settlement money to find a new therapist. This time, I researched diligently, interviewed 3 different counselors. I chose Dr. Megan Foster, a grief specialist with 15 years of experience. My first session with her was everything therapy should be. She stayed awake for the entire 50 minutes. She asked thoughtful questions, listened intently, took notes about what I said, not grocery lists. When I talked about my brother's death, she responded with genuine empathy and helpful frameworks. She didn't fall asleep. She just did her job like a professional. It felt revolutionary. I realized how much I'd lowered my expectations, accepted unacceptable behavior because I was so vulnerable, so desperate. Dr. Chin helped me understand that seeking help when you're grieving doesn't mean accepting whatever treatment someone offers. I deserved competent care. My new therapy sessions progressed steadily. Dr. Chin helped me process not just my brother's death, but also the secondary trauma of being exploited when I was most vulnerable. She explained Dr. Hutchinson's negligence added a layer of betrayal to my grief, complicating my healing. I'd sought help, and instead experienced abandonment and manipulation that created its own kind of trauma. We worked through my anger at Dr. Hutchinson, my frustration with the licensing system, my grief over my brother that got tangled in everything. Dr. Chin taught me actual coping strategies. She validated my experiences without making me feel broken or difficult. After 3 months, I was sleeping better, crying less. The grief was still there, but more manageable. I could talk about my brother without falling apart, look at his photos without that crushing weight. Dr. Chin reminded me healing wasn't linear, but I was making real progress now. This was the work I should have been doing from the start. For months later, I found myself in a support group, a circle of folding chairs. I'd been putting it off, but Maddie kept encouraging me. The facilitator asked if anyone wanted to share, and I raised my hand. I told them about paying $300 a session to watch someone sleep, about being gaslit, about feeling crazy and alone until I exposed her. A woman started crying, saying her therapist did something similar. A man shared that his psychiatrist was visibly intoxicated. Everyone had a story about being vulnerable and exploited, about reporting misconduct and being ignored, about feeling powerless against professionals. Hearing their experiences made me realize how common this was, how crucial it was that I'd spoken up. Several people came up afterward, saying my story gave them courage. I left feeling less alone than I had in months. Knowing what happened to me mattered beyond just my own healing. Leia and I stayed in touch. She found a good therapist too, specializing in trauma from medical negligence. She was finally processing what Dr. Hutchinson had done. The permanent revocation helped her trust the system again, proved accountability was possible. We met monthly, our own informal support system. Leah mentioned 2 other former patients had found better care. What started as personal revenge had become a movement. 6 months after the board demonstration, an official envelope arrived from the State Therapy Board. Stanley's name on the return address. Inside, a formal letter thanking me for my courage, explaining that my actions had prompted significant changes. New protocols for investigating complaints, more thorough follow-up, direct observation for cases with multiple reports, patient accounts taken seriously. Stanley wrote that my willingness to volunteer as a demonstration patient had exposed systemic failures. The board was developing better training for members on recognizing manipulation tactics. He even included his direct contact. Reading that letter, I realized my personal revenge had actually improved the system for future patients. I told Dr. Chin about the letter. She smiled. A perfect example, she said, of how speaking up about injustice can create meaningful change beyond individual circumstances. We'd been working together for 6 months. I was finally making real progress. The grief was still there, but it was different now. More like something I carried with me, instead of something crushing me from the inside. Dr. Chen had taught me actual coping strategies. I could look at photos of my brother without completely falling apart. I could talk about the accident without my throat closing up. I could remember the good times without spiraling into guilt about surviving. The experience with Dr. Hutchinson had taught me to trust my own perceptions, to advocate for myself. Skills that served me well far beyond therapy. I learned that being vulnerable didn't mean accepting whatever treatment someone offered. That seeking help required finding someone competent enough to actually provide it. Dr. Chin reminded me that healing wasn't linear. Hard days would still come, but I had tools now. I was healing, truly healing, for the first time since the accident. Knowing I'd prevented Dr. Hutchinson from harming other grieving people made the difficult journey worthwhile. My brother's death had broken something in me, but it also forced me to find a strength I never knew I had. Have you ever faced a situation where you had to fight for what you knew was right, even when it felt like the world was against you? Or perhaps you've experienced injustice and wondered if speaking up would even make a difference. Tell me what you think. I really want to know.